Welcome to Cryptid Mysterious. Tonight's encounter comes to us from Sam Longfooter, a Native American. Ironic last name being that this is a Bigfoot encounter. Let's jump right into this encounter. But before we do, I'd greatly appreciate you hitting that subscribe button for me. And I definitely appreciate everybody that has been subscribed. And I greatly enjoy the fact that you guys are enjoying my content. It's a great inspiration to keep on keeping on here and improving what I do. Well, let's get into it. Sam writes, in 2008, we were going up to the Tongass National Forest region for a grizzly bear hunt, Alaskan style. Having flown into Ketchikan, we had arranged for a guide service to meet up with us. He had a 36-foot trawler-style ship with a 20-foot aluminum tender in tow. The plan being to get us in close proximity via the Bem Canal to where we would hunt. Thereafter, we would anchor the trawler and take the skiff up to the Unic River to establish our camp and begin the hunt. I'm not going to lie to you. You can easily die on a grizzly hunt, and many have through the years. You can do everything right and have your gun jam at the critical moment in which you're firing your shot and be mauled to death. I always hunt grizzly with 1 or 2 armed men beside myself for this reason. And yes, the gun jamming has actually happened to me personally, with a grizzly charging at us from 70 feet away. If my guide had not been there at the ready, I would not be here with you today. My guide for this hunt was a well-seasoned old-timer who knew this area well, and when it came to grizzlies, he was renowned for his ability to consistently score the largest of the large. The plan was to take the tender into the zone each day from the main ship and hunt the woods, returning to the main ship every afternoon to eat and sleep until we found our mark. The forest by the river is perpetually damp and shadowy. Its floor is covered predominantly in a layer of thick, spongy green moss, which silences not only our steps, but those of a bear as well. This at times makes one ask the question, just who is stalking who? If you're not careful, the tables can be turned swiftly, leaving you wishing that you'd never been born. On our first day in, we'd come across numerous tracks that were fresh and large. We also had located numerous tree scrapes indicating a large bear was in the area. That afternoon, it started to rain, and rain hard. I'd learned many years ago to leave the woods if it started to rain while hunting bear. Sound is such a critical aspect that to have it drowned out by a noisy rainfall can prove to be deadly. And so it was that we left the woods for the remainder of the day. Unfortunately, it kept raining throughout the night, as well as into the following day. So we made a decision as a group to stay put in the ship until the weather became more favorable. On the third day, we were back in the woods. The forest was soaked. As we walked, our boots were sinking into the moss 3 or 4 inches with every step we took. The bear's prints, which we had seen the other day, were quite large, indicating that a seriously big bear was on the prowl. At times in here, we couldn't see with clarity more than 30 feet ahead or to the side of us. Knowing that a large grizzly could cover ground quickly, we were all on edge. We were making our way in deep when we ran across a second set of prints that were not from a bear. Immediately, we all knew what they were from. These prints were well over 24 inches long and 10 inches wide. Some of them were at least a foot deep or more into the moss. We were now following the tracks of a bear and a Sasquatch. This was quite a duo to be in the woods with, and not being able to hear nor see them could prove to be devastating. We'd been tracking what we believed to be a 1,000-pound bear based on the size of its tracks, and now, based on the size of the Sasquatch tracks, God only knows this thing, what this thing would weigh in at. I was not ignorant of the beast, and neither was my guide. This was an extremely dicey and dangerous situation, but curiosity had gotten the best of us, and we moved forward. There were hundreds and hundreds of tracks laid down, in line with each other, moving off in the direction we were now heading. It was then that the realization came upon me that we were no longer interested in the grizzly. We were now stalking a Sasquatch through this dense and treacherous forest. It must have been about an hour into our hike, with the trail having gone cold in the least. We started to break out of the damp forest into a clearing filled with tall grass and clusters of trees. This was the absolute worst-case scenario imaginable for stalking a bear or anything else. A grizzly could come busting out of here at any moment and be on us before we knew what happened. We weren't making a sound as we walked, like we were walking on a mattress with bare feet. It was almost instantaneous that, as we entered this field, a stench of what I can only describe as being raw, fresh shit hit all of our nostrils at the same time. It was the foulest smelling odor that you could imagine, and it overwhelmed us almost to the point of gagging. As we stood there, some areas of the grass and brush ahead of us appeared to be some 6 feet tall or better. While we were coming to grips with the stench and what was before us, a huge figure started to rise up out of the grass some 50 feet from where we stood. As soon as we saw it, we knew what it was. We ducked down in unison, and although we were hidden, the problem now was that we couldn't see what we knew was the Sasquatch. If he had decided to turn and retrace his steps, it would surely be a gunfight. As we sat, squatting, we could hear some grunting sounds coming from the beast. Then everything went quiet. We wouldn't dare stand up and remained squatting with our guns pointed straight ahead for some 30 minutes or more, expecting that at any moment the grass in front of us would part, revealing this hideous monster. I was the first one who actually stood to my feet to have a look around. It was safe, and I waved for the guide to back out of where we were. We made it all the way back to the tender and then to the ship, having made the decision to quit the hunt for the day. We believed that this Sasquatch was squatting in the brush, relieving itself, and had just stood up with its back to us as we ducked down. The following day, we were not prepared to give up on this location, knowing that a huge grizzly was on the prowl. We put the gear into the skiff and once again went ashore. We began to scout the forest in the same way we had the day before, but we were not coming across any new grizzly tracks, other than the ones from the previous day's hunt. In similar fashion to the day before, about an hour into the hunt, we once again came upon a new set of Sasquatch prints, only this time there were 2 sets of tracks paralleling each other, and there were many of them, with one set being much larger than the other. Our hunch at the time was that the grizzly had moved out, either because of the competition or perhaps because it wasn't willing to put up with a territorial fight for its domain. This was all a guess because we really don't know anything about the relationships between these creatures. But the facts being what they were, the bear was gone, and now there were 2 Sasquatch in the area. The day before, as the Sasquatch began to stand, we squatted down immediately upon seeing him. Having said as much, I still saw that its body not yet standing fully erect. was at least 4 feet taller than the surrounding grass. I'm 6 feet tall, and some of the grass was taller than me. We knew that this larger Sasquatch was, at the very least, all of 11 to 12 feet tall. Additionally, we already knew the size of its feet, having tracked it through the forest and into the field. We had decided yet again to track these two sets as far as we could without getting into a compromised position, as we had the day before. It must have been at least a mile or more into the stalk when we came upon a very large decaying tree on the ground, covered in moss. The tree, for the most part, in the center of its remaining trunk, had been freshly torn apart. Both sets of prints were present, overlapping each other around the entire trunk. We now knew that these Sasquatch were more than likely harvesting grubs from the decaying tree. It's funny, but this is the type of thing which is actually taught in survivalist training. Grubs can serve as a source of food for humans who find themselves in dire straits. Unwilling to carry on the search any further, having come for a grizzly, not a Sasquatch, we aborted the hunt and went back to the ship. 2 days later, I had scored a large bear several miles away on the northwest side of the river. No further evidence of Sasquatch was seen or heard. I cannot emphasize enough the fear that came upon me when I was suddenly confronted with the enormity of this monster standing up in front of us that day. The sheer size and dimensions of what we could see were staggering. Even with my rifle in hand, I felt it wouldn't be enough if it had charged. By the time a bullet would have done it in, we would have been dead for sure. You can't just believe it, and yet there it is, standing before you. From the waist up, looking back, which was our perspective, I was looking at what appeared to be the shape of an old-fashioned kite. The middle of the longer bottom section of the kite being its waist, which was more than likely 3 or more feet wide. The back angling up even wider to the area of the shoulders would be seen as the main rib area of the kite. The shoulders were probably something along the lines of 7 feet wide. The upper angled section of the kite would be its upper trapezius muscles. These muscles were so large, they were obscuring almost its entire head from view. I believe it was only looking at maybe a third of its head because of the immense size of its muscles. Well, guys, exaggeration or not, sounds like a pretty freaking big creature. I don't think I would have gone back in those woods. But then again, I wasn't there. You gotta have some pretty big cojones to go tracking a 1,000-pound grizzly in Alaska. I'd do it, I suppose. Going with the right group. You gotta know what you're doing in those situations. That's for dang sure. Well, what do you think of this story? Drop it down in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've had an encounter with anything like this, a Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Dogman, any kind of cryptid, anything mysterious for that matter, I'd love to hear about it. Drop me an email at cryptidmysterious@gmail.com, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.